Hello and welcome to Nature Connections. Thanks to everyone who's watching this video. In the Nature Connections interview series, I talk to people from all paths of life, but who have one thing in common, which is that they help us to connect with nature and bring nature into our lives. In today's episode, I'm very excited to speak with Joanna Thornill. I hope that's how you say your name. So hi, Joanna, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Joanna, so short introduction, and then Joanna will tell us more about herself. Joanna is an interior stylist, a best-selling author, as well as a creative consultant, and all widely featured in the press, and most recently with your new book that I've actually, of course, have with me. So that's the new Mindful Home. So you basically help us to create interior spaces and homes that are not only that don't only look good, but that also like feel good and make us, feel really identified with our space and support our soul, from what I gather. And I can't wait for you to tell us more about all this. I was actually really surprised when I came across you and your book on Instagram, because the words you use were exactly sort of pinpointing what I'm trying to do with my own brand and artwork. And so, yeah, I'm super excited to hear more about you, about your book, and talk about this sort of lost connection to nature and to our homes with you, and how we can reconnect with, I think, what you call this primal yearning, or for nature and for bringing it closer to us and to our lives and our homes. But yeah, first I'd love to discover more about who you are, and what's your personal sort of connection to nature. Could you start by telling us a bit about you and sort of what you do and why you do it?
So I work as I'm a freelance commercial interior stylist and writer and author, and so for the past kind of 15 or so years I've worked on photo shoots for magazine editorial features and also for brands, so helping them create their lookbooks and catalogs, all those sorts of things. I've styled events as well. And then writing wise, I've written magazine features. I do content and copywriting as well for brands. And I do monthly trend reports for WGSN, which is a trend forecasting agency. So I do kind of a monthly emerging trends report on interiors, and it also covers crafts and DIY a bit as well. So all quite broad, really. And I think in the last 4 or 5 years, I just started to feel kind of like I wanted something a bit more than the superficial. Like everything, obviously interiors is a very trends led world, but I was more interested in trends in the kind of the broader sort of societal sense of kind of what are the things that are moving and shifting and changing, rather than the more kind of faddy trends like flamingos on cushions or whatever. So I kind of started we all have a flamingo, but it's time and place. So I think I just kind of started just kind of delving into that a bit more, and also just becoming slightly more interested in sort of holistic health and just holistic living in general, and just kind of wanting to look a bit deeper into why certain designs seem to kind of make us feel certain ways, and why what certain colors do. So I pulled it all together. So I had the idea for my book, The New Mindful Home. Probably it sort of the seed started planting maybe like three or so years ago. And then I kind of refined the idea a bit, and I was talking with my publishers about it. They published my last book, My Bedroom is an Office, which turned out to be like bizarrely true for everyone in the last year. But yeah, that's another story. So I was speaking to them about it for quite a while, and just that they sort of were instantly very interested in the concept, but we were trying to just sort of figure out how exactly kind of how to go about it. so yeah, and so then by the time it finally got commissioned, it was like, I've got all this research now, like I've got this bank of information. And yeah, I was just kind of amazed really at how much information and sort of research and scientific analysis and things out there, all sort of related to these kind of underlying underlying reasons why we react and feel in a certain way to different designs and shapes and textures, smells, all these things. And I felt like no one had sort of necessarily applied a lot of that to home design. So I kind of thought, yeah, that was kind of where I wanted to come in. I sort of felt like there's a lot of there's texts on kind of the more sort of spiritual side of things about crystals and energies and feng shui and that sort of stuff, and then there's these kind of science papers about that your brain is doing this. And I sort of thought, well, I kind of fit in the middle of that I'm really interested in both, but I kind of have not the practical knowledge of how to apply that in a way that is that is sort of relatable to like everyday normal people that just kind of, I just want to make my house nice and make me feel happy. How can I do that?
I love that.
So yeah, it's kind of trying to bring all of that together really. And of course nature and biophilia is a big part of that picture as well.
And so why did you suddenly become interested in this holistic living? Like, did it come from a personal experience, or just did it start with a trend that you saw, that you noticed 3 years ago, or was it like really like a personal, like you were maybe building your home, or how did you suddenly think like, oh, I'm gonna be more interested in this sort of holistic living?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just sort of came, it was sort of very gradual really. It wasn't really one thing necessarily. It was sort of lots of little things, like we've got rescue dogs, so I was trying to help them sort of, I kind of switched to give them like a more holistic diet and to give them like rescue remedy and things if they were feeling anxious, fireworks and stuff. So it's like, oh, let's get the rescue remedy out. Like, I'm not sure quite what it does, but I'll give it a go. So it was kind of sort of that kind of, I suppose, got me started really. And then I started looking at like, oh, well, if all these kind of natural remedies and things can help dogs with anxiety, maybe it can help me as well. And then just sort of ended up kind of, I think I get a bit, once something piques my interest, I'm like down a bit of a rabbit hole in there, and then suddenly I'm like reading about quantum physics or something. It's like, so it sort of just became, it just was kind of a bit of a journey in that sense, and then sort of started from there, making the connection between how that can sort of relate to our home. Started learning more about sort of the brain and neuroscience and neuroaesthetics as well, which is sort of how the brain reacts to aesthetics. And I think it was just time, the sort of time of life as well, in that I was sort of reached kind of mid late 30s and had been doing what I do for a while, and just kind of just sort of thought, I like the idea of going a bit deeper with it, rather than just purely kind of here's 10 Scandi cushions. I just wanted to kind of go a bit beyond and kind of talk about why it can help us, because our homes impact our kind of well-being so much. And I think everyone has kind of realized that, even more so in the last 18 months or so. But I think people don't necessarily kind of consciously make that connection, or know necessarily how to adapt their home in that way. I think often people sort of talk about like, oh, what kind of, when you read kind of typical interiors advice, it's like, what style should I decorate in, rather than how do I want to feel, and then what kind of materials and textures and looks would help me achieve that. So I just kind of felt like things are slightly the wrong way around.
It's kind of like you're saying, like, instead of like, if you take the why, what, how of Simon Sinek, and you're saying like, basically this whole time we've been using the what, like Scandi, like, this color, that color, but you're like saying, okay, here's the why, and like bringing like a real meaning to how you decorate your home, basically.
Yeah, I loved his start with white. That was one of those talks that you just sort of watched, like, I need to freeze this and just
Mm,
let it sink in and then watch a bit more. It was
yeah.
yeah,
And
very
like look
interesting.
at how this, applies to what you do and how you can do that better as well. Like
Mm,
to really communicate, the importance of like what you're doing, for example, like having a nurturing home, and that's really powerful. And so
mm.
it's other people have said that you basically had a crystal ball, because really like you started this 3 years ago, right? Like how to create more like well-being in our home environment, and it turned out like that's what everyone needed in the last year and a half, like this new reconnection to home.
Mm.
um, can I ask you actually what does home mean to you? You've worked your whole life in interiors, in yeah, designing homes and helping people design their own like home environment. What is home for you?
So we bought we're in our first home, and quite possibly our forever home, because I don't think I could face moving again. Yeah, so to me, and especially so since I have felt very at home in rentals that I've been in, because I have always sort of made an effort to make them personal as much as possible within obviously landlord and budget restrictions. But for me, it has always just kind of been a real sanctuary. I think I'm someone who would identify as
Mhm.
being quite introverted, so the home is always the space that I need to kind of feel safe and
Mm.
recharged and refreshed.
Ooh, this feels.
And yeah, and I think, and it's been interesting actually, so the whole lockdown experience, I've actually redecorated sort of several rooms during lockdown, because we lost so much kind of stimulation from the outside world. So previously it was kind of like everything, life outside the house is frantic, hectic, busy, 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 and so I just need my home to be kind of really calm and chilled and sedate.
Yeah.
Whereas then it was suddenly like, oh, I'm feeling really like that there is nothing else other than my home. So I did end up sort of bringing in more color and pattern, and sort of redecorating in ways I didn't think I necessarily would
Mm,
have done, because I sort of felt like I actually needed that stimulation. So you can probably
mm.
see in the background I've got
Yeah.
quite, like, I'm quite a fan of stuff. And I realized in lockdown there was one room I tried to decorate to make really, really calm, and then I realized I just don't feel relaxed in here, because I
Mm,
need stuff, I need the visual stimulation that actually helps me to feel calmer, because otherwise if there's nothing to catch my interest, then my brain starts
mm.
whirring. So I kind of,
Oh
so
yeah,
for
I love
me
that.
it's more
Yeah.
relaxing to have the things like everything is kind of, it might look a bit chaotic sometimes, but
Mm,
like everything kind of has its place and is ordered. But
mm.
yeah, I
It's
need.
almost like it's reassuring for you to have things around, because it anchors you into like who you are, and like surrounds you with everything that represents who you are, basically, instead of like mindfulness being just like a blank white wall with like a little minimalist painting.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm,
And I think it's, and that's the thing, that is such a personal thing, because I'm sure for like for some people having kind of a lot of stuff would be too overwhelming and stressful for them, and whereas for me sort of a blank white minimal space would
mm.
feel really oppressive. I don't think I would feel
Yeah.
comfortable in there. So it's definitely about kind of, it's definitely a personal thing, and
Mm,
that is what I try to sort of get across in the book, that it's not
yeah.
about this is a mindful style and this is the colors of mindfulness. It's so
Yeah.
personal. And also it is about the things as well. So I've always been a fan of decorating with um, things that are sort of vintage, or that have a sort of a connection, whether it's kind of something from, passed down from my family, or something that I've bought on a special, like a lovely holiday that brings back
Mm,
those sort of happy memories. So I've just sort of tried to create, and it's happened over, like, we've been in our house for 9 years and it's kind of constantly evolving. But
mm.
I really like to sort of just gradually layer in all these things that sort of
Mm.
all kind of the story of our lives, so to
Yeah.
speak. Sounds a bit cheesy, but
No, but that's exactly
it's
it, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Surround yourself
and that's
with.
kind of calming for me.
Mm. Yeah, it's like don't let others dictate, or don't let the trends dictate
Mm,
what you put in your home, and create that for yourself with like building like same way you build your identity through time and who you are, like build your home in the same way, kind of. I love that.
mm.
And in terms of nature, so when did you first sort of discover the importance of nature for you, when did you think that was important for you? Sort of why is there a chapter about nature in your book, The New Mindful Home?
Yeah, so again, I think it's something that I had unconsciously been aware of, but hadn't consciously really thought about, because I've always lived in cities. I live in London.
Mm,
So, and where we are now, actually in Waltham Forest, we are lucky that we're quite near. There's lots of the Epping Forest and lots of. It's a very green area, but nonetheless, we are in an urban environment.
mm,
And I think, again, sort of what this kind of time, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, when I was starting to look at this slightly more holistic way of living, and then having dogs as well, and then having to get starting to go out in nature a lot more than I otherwise would have done, sort of properly into the
yeah.
woods and the marshes and the depths of winter, and things that I just wouldn't have done before. It kind of, things started to click into place. So things like um, I've always really liked kind of natural, like old rustic woods. I've always tried to bring in kind of old wooden furniture and things like that. But I would never have consciously, but well, looking back now, I realize that is at least in part because of that connection to nature, of having those sort of materials around me. And the more I kind of became aware of it, the more I've sort of just almost inadvertently started bringing in more natural materials, and also phasing out more of the kind of the synthetic ones that have been in the house. And it's just kind of something that sort of evolved over time. And then obviously the kind of the trend for house plants also, I think, sort of kicked off quite massively again, sort of that kind of 4 or 5 years ago. And again, I was sort of started on that trend because it was a trend. And then I don't think at the time I was aware of kind of
Mm,
the psychological mental health benefits that having houseplants can bring, all the sort of the looking after them and tending them, and obviously the benefits that they have to your home, the fact that they can suck in yeah,
yeah.
they actually suck in like VOCs from the environment, and they help regulate moisture levels in the air. So there's so many benefits,
Mm,
physical and mental, to having plants. And it's sort of not really until I got fully researching it for the book that it's like, oh, that's why I like them so much, and that's why they've become so popular. And I know certainly
mm,
in lockdown there's been statistics about sort of plant sales gone through the roof.
yeah.
Everyone's at it now, and also my local one of my local plant shops, they've said that their sort of prices have shot up because there's
Mm,
such high demand. People can't get them quick enough. So
mm. Yeah, the plants, but also like flower deliveries. Like I think,
yeah.
well, like everyone, like I started doing like, well, a lot of people, I started doing like bi-weekly flower deliveries like during the whole of lockdown, and just like it brought us so much like joy to have like a little piece of what we couldn't have because we couldn't go outside, like into our homes. But yeah, clearly they've been exploding, and there's all these kinds of new businesses as well. Like I discovered this window fleur company that sells um like bulk like things for your windowsills, like and then like every season they send you like replacement buckets with flowers of different kinds for each season.
Oh, wow, that's so
Yeah,
clever.
fascinating. And that came out of lockdown as well, so clearly there's also innovation coming out of this, which is great.
Yeah, no, there is, and I've seen there's sort of been, I think, yeah, definitely a rise in the sort of letterbox floral
Mm,
deliveries, and also dried flower deliveries as well, which is kind of a
yeah.
really nice, sustainable, like alternative to fresh or fake.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, and also the kind of plant subscription services. There's kind of
Mm,
quite a few of them around now, which is another
mm,
sort of really nice idea. Sort of
yeah.
build a collection.
Yeah, it's a great way, obviously a very obvious way, like you're saying, to bring nature inside the home. But what do you think that is specifically about nature that makes us feel good? Because obviously there's the obvious physical benefits of like, absorbing the carbon, etc. But like, what do you think it is about nature that
Mm,
like almost like, unconsciously or at another level that makes us feel good, and kind of what's this magical energy that we're talking about? Because we all feel it, like this kind of
mm.
yearning, and especially in urban areas. Yeah, what do you think this is?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of from the, as I say, the research I'd done, it kind of just seemed to make a lot of sense to me of all the things that I'd sort of thought and felt but hadn't really realized that was what it was. And I think it is just this fact that our kind of our brains, or certainly like the primitive part of our brain, is still very much in kind of caveman hunter-gatherer mode, and we've evolved so quickly. Sort of the last kind of 200 years of human civilization is like so catapulted from where we were, and our brains haven't quite kind of caught up. And so, yeah, certainly, like the research I've done makes sense to me that we are sort of our brains are kind of still scanning the space in this primal way. We're still kind of in this hunter-gatherer mindset, but we're just living in a very different way now, and we're so far removed from that environment, especially if you're in an urban space. I think there was a statistic that I heard that I think 60% of all humans will be living in an urban environment by 2030. So that's kind of this huge disconnect from our kind of agricultural, rural, pastoral roots, and also just the activities that we would have done. We're sort of primed to be kind of keeping half an eye out for danger, and we're primed to be sort of listening for the sounds of what's going on, and connecting with our environment in a way that we just don't do now, or it's very focused now on just on the visuals, whereas the other senses are sort of not really getting a look in. So yeah, I think it's we've just ended up kind of removing ourselves from our natural way of being. But it does seem that just these elements, like just bringing in sort of plants, bringing in natural materials into the home, decorating with certain colors, and then making sure you are kind of getting out for a walk in nature, that does seem like it has a big it can redress a lot of that. It's not to say like, so we all need to go move back to like caves now.
Yeah.
So
that is actually especially in London, I'm hearing about a lot of people who are moving out of London and into the countryside because they've been sort of very, like, this yearning has been so strong that they think, okay, like I want to experience that and be much closer to nature. But then there's also the rest of us who are in urban environments and who are feeling like, how do I bring nature to me, right? Like, and how can I, have this connection even though I don't move out and change my lifestyle entirely. But I love this idea of this primal sort of needs and like this primal like being inside of us, because I think especially in the last year and a half, like we've felt this in so many levels, just even this like panic for food, and how are we going to eat, like, and that's like the primal, like feed myself, feed my family, and so this nature connection is really like comes from our guts, from our full being, and not from like our constructs. And so it's really important to like nurture it and respond to it, because our bodies say something to us. Generally it means that we need it.
Yeah, and that's so true actually, because it was such a panic, that sort of the early days, but it is that panic of like, we are completely dependent, certainly in urban areas, we're 100% dependent on the shops and the supply chains. And so to sort of see that kind of almost overnight collapse, it's like I literally, like, there is literally nothing I could do. I don't have the backup of like, or I'll go and pick the potatoes in the field or whatever. I'm so like urban, I don't
Exactly.
don't know how these things work, but
I'm going to go harvest my carrots.
Yeah, I'll just eat my like coriander plant for a bit. So yeah, and I think I do think that was on a subconscious level, part of the panic of like, we have cut ourselves off. We've got nothing.
So. And nature is so like certain, right? Like the trees have always been there. Like I have a tree right now in front of me, and it's like, I feel in this panic mode, like you really like hang on to what is certain and what is real and like much older than us, much like, just that's really soothing and calming in a way. And so personally in your life, like what are the ways in which you told us a little bit about like the house plants, but what are other ways in which you bring nature into your life and into your home? And maybe you can tell us a bit more about sort of what you talk about in that chapter and in your book as well. Like, what are some of the ways that you do it and that you'd recommend others to do that?
Yeah, so I think So I'm very conscious about trying to use natural materials where possible, and so so I've got my wooden
Mm.
sort of,
The dark
what's
wood
it called,
little, yeah,
cupboard in
piece of furniture.
in the background. So I try to bring in as many authentic materials as possible, and I like vintage and older woods that have some kind of pattern, a patina to them that you can still see. I do sometimes paint wood, so so you can sort of just see. So I'm in my garden log cabin, and I have painted the wood from its natural timber, but I've done it in a sort of a stain, so you can still see the
Mm.
texture of the wood
Mm.
beneath it. Um, and so I kind of try to be sympathetic to the natural materials as much as possible. And in sort of more recent redecorating we've done at home, I've brought in, for example, like rugs made of jute and natural materials rather than a sort of synthetic blend. Our garden furniture is rattan.
Mm.
So I'm very keen on just trying to, as much as possible, bring in natural materials and like sort of natural metals, and
Mm.
in kind of an authentic way. And also I do like decorating with the colors of nature. So I talk a bit in my book about color psychology, and
Mm.
it's such a massive fascinating topic, but I've identified that I'm an autumn palette, and ever since I
Mm.
kind of discovered that, I'm suddenly like, that makes so much sense, and it's actually made decorating so much easier because I know exactly what kind of colors work for me. And it's not about specific colors as such. It's not like, oh, you're autumn, so you're orange, green and
Mm.
blue. It's like the sort of tones and the sort of the warmth and the saturation of the colors. So I've been able to kind of use that information to redecorate certain rooms in a palette that I know is going to sort of support my autumnal
Mm.
ways.
Mm.
So I ended up, our living room
Love
was probably
this.
the
Yeah.
most biophilic sort of space, and it used to be dark grey because it was, again, when sort of the world felt so busy and hectic, it was sort of like, it was almost kind of became like a bit of a sort of a nothing, in
Mm.
that there was like, it didn't stimulate me and it was what I needed. But then in lockdown it was like, I can't live with this anymore. It's too oppressive. So I've painted it this kind of really, really rich dark green, and it's
Mm.
made such difference. It just feels so much, I really feel that kind of the connection to nature. There's a tree outside the window, and
Mm.
it just all feels like it works. It just sort of feels so much better now. So that's kind of one of the key things
Mhm.
I've done in the last year.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, the colors, yeah, definitely. I've also really been redecorating, and this is my latest
Yeah, no, I
addition.
love that wallpaper. It's amazing.
So it's like, welcome to my forest.
Yeah. No, it's really immersive. I think that's the thing. We've sort of gone all round with the colour, so it just feels really immersive. It's quite a
Yeah,
small room. It's only like
yeah.
3 by 4 meters or something. So you kind of go in, it's like, oh,
Mm. And you also talk
nature.
about like your actual use of I think one thing you mentioned is like in the rituals chapter is around like using sage. I guess that's
Yes.
also in a way bringing nature into your life because you're bringing the scent and like the actual, you know, burning of a natural material.
Mm,
Is that something, so that's something you do as well on a regular
yeah. I've
basis?
got my little sage tray here.
Wow.
And yeah, we were talking about ceramics earlier before we got on. I did a ceramics class last no, 2 years ago now, and I made my little sage dish.
Mm.
So it's kind of all very lovely. So it sits on my desk.
Mm.
So I tend to do it, and so I like to use that as part of a ritual to start my day before I start work, because I have a tendency to want to kind of, like, again, the sort of my kind of monkey mind is like, okay, we need to just get straight on and do our work. But then I force myself almost sometimes to just take a moment to kind of light a bit of sage, and I'll just sort of walk around the
Mm.
space with it and just kind of use it to kind of ground myself, really. So again, I've got my jute rug in here, so I'm often, well, obviously at the
Mm.
moment it's summer, so I'm normally like barefoot, so I've kind of got that under my feet, and it's just kind of quite a grounding experience.
Mm.
Literally kind of a couple of minutes, and I'll either think about sort of a specific thing that I want to kind of
Mm.
feel in the day. So rather than like going through the to-do list, like I must phone the bank, it's kind of like, I want to feel grounded, today I want to feel energized, whatever it might be. So
Mm.
yes, I do like to do that kind of at the start before I before I get on with anything. And it's just quite, no, I just think it's really helpful by sort of taking those few minutes before you're just straight into like the emails.
Yeah.
And yeah, and as you say, it is kind of a connection to, there is that connection to nature, and it does have that lovely, it's such a lovely smell that it brings.
I must try it. I haven't tried that yet.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But it really sounds like you're basically recommending to stimulate sort of all the senses, because you've talked about smell, obviously, just now, the visuals with color, and of course, like depictions of nature in art, or yeah, doing your own craft. I think you mentioned also like drawing, like painting trees and flowers, etc. What other senses are there? Smell, visual, hearing, of course, with like presence of water, I think, like as a source of like, you can hear the sound. And then touching with the jute. So you were talking about the jute rug and like having your feet on this natural material. And maybe I'm forgetting a sense, but taste. I don't know. We talked about coriander. Eating the produce from your own garden. That's definitely a way.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Or even your little herb garden, the kitchen herb garden. You mentioned that in your book, right?
Yes, yeah. And yeah, that's so there's certain things we've started, like I do things now, like I keep spring onions, almost like flowers now. I've got a little jar, a little vase of spring onions. Yeah, I've had a go at a few other living garden things. Some have worked, some not so much. But it's a nice process. But yeah, and I think it is really important to consider all of the senses, and also the naturalness of those senses, because so often we're used to kind of plug in air fresheners and or kind of candles that might not necessarily be that, like so many candles, it's kind of crazy how so many candles are actually really, like, they're basically toxic. So a lot are made from paraffin, and they might have synthetic fragrances rather than sort of essential oils, and it can release like toxins into the atmosphere, which is sort of crazy because you're lighting.
Joanna did warn me about her jumpy internet, so I think she'll be back just before we wrap up. Joanna, come back. She did say that it would take a few seconds and then she would appear. So let's see.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry.
I was like, it's gonna come back at some point.
Yeah, sorry. It seems to do that. I could hear you, and I was like waving.
Oh, it's like you should say. We're just talking about the candles and the paraffin. Yeah.
So basically, just
worry about.
So just the importance of scent in the picture, and scent kind of, it goes sort of straight to that kind of memory. I think it's like an olfactory thing, goes straight to the memory part of our brain, so it can be a really useful tool. And it's also something that I try and use as well. So I've got different candles and different essential oils. I've got a diffuser as well in the background. So sometimes I've got like an oil blend that's sort of meant to help sort of stimulation and creativity. So if I know I've got to go and like write a trend report or something, I'll kind of consciously pop that on and be like, right now, that's kind of my cue to, focus in that way. So it can be, I think it's really useful to bring in scent as a tool in that way, as well as it just being something that's kind of nice.
Love it. So many ideas. And of course, there's a lot more in your book, and can't recommend enough to have a look. Especially, I'm really excited about the craft bit, because, I'm personally redesigning my home as well. And just moved in like about a year and a half ago. So it's a big project. But yeah, I'm going to try a few of these things for sure. So thanks so much for sharing all this about your personal journey and all these tips and recommendations as to how to feel like create a home that really represents who we are, and soothes this like yearning for sort of meaning and nature in our lives and through our homes, of course, because our home is is the one place where we spend most of our time, isn't it? Well, especially these days. And so
Yeah, we
create an
spend a
environment.
crazy amount of time in our
Yeah.
homes. It's something like 93% of our time is spent indoors.
Mm.
And so if that's in during a lockdown, then that is like almost the entire time in the house. So
Yeah.
it's so important.
So yeah, it
Yeah.
better be a place that makes you feel good and that expresses who you are and just like refuels you in a way that is good for you and not good for everybody, everybody else, just what is
Yeah.
good for you. So I love
No,
that.
exactly. It's so important. And I think I read a really interesting article the other day about it being sort of reframed almost as a form of self-care. So in the same way that you kind of take the time to do a nice skincare ritual, it's really worth taking the time to put that effort into your home. I think often we don't think about it like that, especially if you're renting. You might sort of, and I rented for
Yeah.
years and years, so I think there's often a mentality of like, well, it's not worth spending any money or putting any effort in because it's not my house. It's like, well, you're still living in it. And also it doesn't necessarily have to relate to spending money. It can just be sort of very small things that you can do that would make a really big difference. So I
Self-care.
advise
I
it to
love it.
everyone.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to reuse this. I mean, that's like going deeper into the why, you know, like it makes us feel good. Yes, but why? Well, because it's self-care. And
Yeah.
that, oh, I love that. That's wonderful. I just have one last question for you because before we wrap up, which is obviously related to trees. And I wanted to ask, like, is there for you like a specific tree or type of tree that evokes a certain memory, or just a tree that you like, a design that you like? I know it's a bit of a tricky on the spot question, but I don't know if there's like in your memory, like somewhere or some place that you identified or you associate to a tree, but you've also told us about your forest walks. You know, is there anything that comes up? Maybe not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose when I think about a nice grounding tree, I kind of naturally go to the oak. I think being British, that's quite a kind of obvious choice, but I think when we're walking in the woods, I really like the trees that kind of the really gnarly ones that sort of are all kind of contorted and bits broken off at some point, and so there's a funny angle on a branch. And I think I'm someone that is prone to seeing faces in things, so I'll often kind of point out to my other half, like, do you see there's like a monkey face in that tree? And so I think
that.
yeah, so a kind of a lovely gnarly tree is my kind of tree really. And obviously the last couple of months when we've had all the blossom out, that's kind of my most favorite tree based thing, because it's just like pink confetti in the sky. It's amazing. So
yeah, pink confetti in the sky. I love it. Let's end on this visual then. Thank you so much, Joanna. I really love hearing you speak about all this, and yeah, it's been great having you. Thanks so much, and yeah, bye. Bye, thanks.